forward, of course, with real world.
Good day, everyone. A warm welcome to each and every one of you today. With only 24 days left until the EU elections, it is with great pleasure and honor, dear audience, that we welcome you to this EU election panel. My name is Leah, and with me I have Johan.
In just a few weeks, Europeans all across the Union will be heading polls to fill the next European Parliament. This will be of immense importance since the composition of the Parliament has a significant effect on the policy that is done in the European Union. In Finland, we will be electing 15 MEPs, and today we are excited to have 5 MEP candidates from different political parties here to join us. Regarding the composition of the panel, representatives of all major Finnish parties were invited. The fight we see here today being the result. Noteworthy is that due to a last-minute cancellation, Ville Merinen from SDF won't be joining us today. We are glad to have all of you here today.
This panel is a joint effort between 3 youth organizations, Jeff Helsinki, FLYA, and EUP Uusimaa. A warm welcome to all our audience members, whether you're here with us in person or tuning in from home. We'll be discussing various election topics covering everything from the environment to international relations, economy, and democracy. But before we start, here are a few important things to note.
First of all, as in all of our events, we adhere to the guidelines for safer space. In short, we maintain a zero-tolerance policy against all forms of inappropriate behavior. You may read the full guidelines on our events link tree at linktree.ee/EU-event or via this QR code that you can see on the screen. In the event of harassment, please reach out to our equality observer, Suvi, who is here with us in the portal, whose contact details can also be found in the link.
Furthermore, please note that the event will be live streamed and photographs will be taken for social media purposes. If you prefer not to be featured on our social media platforms, please reach out to our media personnel as soon as possible. Thank you.
The event will indeed be live streamed on YouTube, on the channel of Jeff Dillon, where the recording will also be available afterwards. In order to guarantee a smooth flow of discussion, the response times are limited to a maximum of 1 minute each, and here we have Frederick kindly timing. After the panelist's time is up, you will hear a sound signal which sounds like this, after which the right to speak will move on to the next person. But without further ado, let's move on with the panel.
Thank you, Jonathan. We'll begin with opening statements from our panelists. In the statements, which will last a maximum of 1 minute, each panelist will introduce themselves and share their perspective on the future of the EU. Dan, go on.
Thank you. Well, the introduction goes in 1 minute, but the future of the EU, well, that's a bit longer. Well, my name is Lasse, I represent the Swedish People's Party in Finland, and I study general and adult education at Helsinki University. I'm the president of Swedish Youth, which is the youth organization for the Swedish People's Party. my perspective on the future of the EU, well, it's strongly embedded in a structural issue we have with demographic decline in the EU and globally. And this is a factor that will affect all sectors of your life in the future.
Hi, my name is Alessandra. I'm a member of the Finnish Parliament. I have a PhD in EU politics, and I used to work in Brussels for 9 years. 6 years in the Commission for President Juncker and Vice President Katainen, and then I was leading the office of MEGA for 3 years, EU Affairs. My future EU is about climate change, it's about defense and security, and it's about economics. And more reasonable European Union is my motto because I want to work better for us.
Hi everybody, I'm Dino Vuorinen. I am the chairperson of Latvia Finland since January 2020. In addition, I'm a master's student in University of Helsinki in Global Political Economy. My vision for Europe's future is a strong coalition of democratic states that respect human rights and also live within the planetary means and also put people and the climate before profits.
Hi guys, my name is Laura and I'm the president of the Finnish Party Youth, and I come from Lappeenranta and I'm a paramedic student here in the University of Applied Sciences. And my view of Europe, or of the future of Europe, as we see, I say Europe is at a crossroads in regards to where it's going. Is it going to a more federal way or direction or a confederal direction? And we have to see how the European Union changes in the economic policies, climate policy, and eventually street policy.
Hi everyone, my name is Leah. I'm a Finnish psychologist from Tampere, and I'm also a deputy member of parliament from the Greens. And the big reason why I'm running in these elections is mental health, but also nature, climate, human rights, and peace. These are my main themes in these elections, and big reason why I want to run in these elections is I'm trying to prove that all politics are mental health politics, and mental health is at its very core very political. Like I think in Finland we often approach Finland as like a very narrow spectrum of social and welfare services, but I think we should really realize that all politics that affect us people affect our mental health. And this is also a very large economical question, which you can see as the EU has to pay over 600 billion euros each year for mental health. So it's a very, very big question in the EU, and I believe that now is a great time to influence it because the EU has also, for the first time ever, created a mental health strategy to pinpoint these issues.
Thank you all. In the beginning of this panel, we want to steer our focus towards the top topic of today, these days. First up, foreign and security policy issues. In this section, we shall touch on topics such as the unanimity in the EU decision-making processes and foreign policy of the Union more broadly. It has been suggested that in the current geopolitical situation, getting rid of the unanimity requirement would enhance the Union's decision-making. Panelists, prepare your voting papers. Here comes the statement. Foreign and security policy must be decided by majority voting among the member states.
Aura, you're not necessarily answering either one. Some member states, like Hungary, may be hesitant to pursue this path. How would you persuade these member states to embrace the change?
Yes, I would not open the Lisbon Treaty, so this is why I'm answering like this. We can use passerelle clauses for some aspects like human rights questions or sanctions against Russia, and you don't need to open the treaty for that. So that's why I'm answering like this. In foreign policy, we can use qualified majority a little bit more, but the framework of this is it.
Thank you. from Aura's right, Pia, if you have something to add, you're most welcome.
Well, if I come back to like the question regarding Hungary, I do think this is a difficult question for sure because I think generally the sanctions that can be used against member states in these kind of issues when we find them not respecting, for example, the common views or act undemocratic or against human rights. But of course, in a situation if we are not able to have the majority vote and we need unanimity, they can use that, and we have seen Hungary use this against the decision making and get back the funds that are withheld from them. So I think it is a difficult question. I think it also opens up the question whether we should be able to kick such a country out of the EU, because if we are also just in this kind of circle where we put those sanctions on a nation that is acting undemocratically, but then in these kind of questions, whether it be like sanctions on Russia, for example, they are then able to get those funds back because they otherwise won't vote on it. So I think we need to see that as an option as well.
Thank you. Does anyone of the other panelists have a comment for this one? Julia, please.
Yes, I definitely think this is something we have to explore because we have seen a lot of issues regarding Hungary, especially regarding aid in Ukraine, which is a very, very critical question in the EU at the moment. And I don't think we can have a situation where single member states can withhold very important decisions that have a large support in the EU. And overall, I think that we're living in a very fast-paced world, and we need very quick decisions on these important matters, and I think this is a real issue that makes decision making harder in the EU.
Yeah, I'd like to oppose that a bit. That Hungary is obviously issue of the current moment, but if we go towards qualified majority voting in other foreign policy aspects, it opens sort of Pandora's box to that minor member states can no longer influence the common foreign policy that's dictated on the EU level, which means that in some cases, if there were in the future to become some sort of foreign policy that would actually be against finishing the interests or somehow more pro-Russia or pro-China, as unlikely that still sounds, that would essentially remove the ability from the smaller member states to influence decision making at that point.
Yeah, and it's not only Hungary probably which should oppose this, but many other member states, and it's a discussion you have to go through where you make member states where you have to make probably some form of compromise where we in some areas delegate the authority to the European Union with just a qualified majority instead of a unanimous decision making. And you brought up here about kicking Hungary out from the EU or some other member state who break against these democratic principles. In a way, I agree with you that it could be good, but then again, then you push them even further towards that and giving up this unanimous decision making in EU would basically get you away from this problem where you don't have to keep these undemocratic member states out of the union.
Thank you for your answers. Let's move on. Now it is time for some yes and no questions. The first statement is, the European Union should put more effort into getting a ceasefire in Gaza. Thank you. Then next statement. China is a security threat to the European Union. The European Union has not done enough in supporting Ukraine. Very unanimous opinions right here.
Would any of the panelists like to elaborate more on your answers?
Thank you. On the China issue, I would like to say that it's not only a security issue when you think about where our information is going, but it's called, one of these, in Finnish you would say, huoltovarmuus. China is one of the most rapidly aging populations, and we can already see that their production capacities in certain areas aren't meeting up to the needs that we have, and this means that we're going to have a shortage of certain products, and this will of course be worsened by the fact that we want to get rid of our China dependency, and that's a good thing. But that requires that we within the EU build up these production chains and create new trade agreements with African nations, India, and the United States.
Vinja, and first answer.
Well, to start with the question of Gaza, which I think ties to all of our global politics as well, is that EU has not only done enough, it has hardly done anything, and mainly has continued to support Israel that is now committing or is accused of committing genocide, and we can see the toll on civilian population in Gaza. And I think that is a really big issue, not only because that is morally just completely unjustified, but it also puts EU in a difficult position where we are saying that we are this peace project and we want to enhance human rights all around, yet we stand there and do nothing when such atrocities are committed. And I think it also makes us really unreliable when we look at the global stage. You mentioned working with African nations, for example, or the global south. But if what the global south is saying, that we don't actually care about what happens to people outside of our borders, or we only care about what Europeans, yet not brown children, that really puts EU in a very hypocritical position.
Yes, I really agree with Vinja on this, and I think we have a real issue with double standards in the European Union at the moment, and we are closing our eyes on what's happening in Gaza right now, which is a very, very big humanitarian issue, a very moral issue that I think we shouldn't have to debate about. I think that it's very strange if we're having this discussion that is it okay to kill children at our camps. I think the European Union is at its core essentially a peace project, and that should be the biggest message that we are giving in the EU, that we are supporting peace all over the world, and we are ready to stand up for our values even when it's difficult, even when it's hard, even when it doesn't benefit from us directly, but because it's right.
Julia, if I may ask, you mentioned double standards. Could you maybe elaborate more on that?
Yes, of course. Thank you for this important question. Because I think, well, the Finnish people have been very united in supporting Ukraine, which is great. And unfortunately, this is not the same situation we have in the EU. And it's a real issue that will we have enough support for Ukraine in the future. But at the same time, I think we have a double standard on how we're responding to Ukraine, and in contrast to how we're responding to Gaza. Because when we're looking at Gaza, we can see that it is a real crisis that's affecting a lot of the civil people there, affecting children, women, innocent people that have no part in the conflict. But for some reason, the EU doesn't want to stand up for this. And well, basically, I think the real reason is money and our own economic benefit, and I think that's very fundamentally wrong.
Thank you. Now moving forward, to put everything neatly together, we shall summarize things a little bit. The last question, which is for each and every one of you, regarding the foreign and security policy, is about the future. Maybe Jan gets to elaborate more on his first comments in this one. The question goes, as a member of the parliament, what enhancements regarding foreign and safety policy are you moving forward on your term? Vinja,
I think I heard it last.
Oh, okay. Laura, you may be the first then.
Could you repeat the question?
The question was, as the member of parliament, what enhancements as in developments regarding foreign and security policy are you moving forward on your 5-year term?
Well, I say there's two sectors in security and foreign policy that I would focus. First is the security for the European Union, which is a reformation of the migration policy and the we manage our external borders. And the second one is more so on the foreign policy. So, well, for example, increasing our armed support to Ukraine and resupplying or rearming our European armies. So fueling the defense industry, keep them not necessarily the monetary aid, but make it easier to compete in the European level and make it easier for them to increase their production at the European level.
Julia, would you like to comment?
Well, big point that I would like to try and advance in the European Union is to point out that the climate crisis is at its very core security crisis that really affects all global conflicts around the world, and this is something we really need to address, both in mitigating climate change, but also how we adapt to it and how we react to it. And also, I would like to advance that how we react to the amount of people that are in need of help globally because of climate change. I think it's a very big global issue we have to address. And also, I would like to point out that, especially in Ukraine at these times, is of extreme importance because Russia is a real big security threat to us at this time, and it's of extreme importance that we won't give far right a chance to rise up in Europe, and instead we focus on our principles, on our values, supporting Ukraine, supporting peace.
Thank you. And now, Pia, I think the microphone is close to you, so people.
For sure, yeah. I totally agree with the fact that climate, for example, is a massive security question as well, and there has been talks about like having a defense commissioner, for example, but I think instead we should look at something more like security commissioner that looks into more like all of the questions we're facing, not just the military threat that we would face, but also the issue of climate and so forth. When it comes to questions of defense, I think Europe has to enhance its common security. I don't think a common army is an answer to that, but more like the capabilities for the national army to work together. I think it's an issue that the situation with the United States, I don't think makes NATO a fully trustworthy partner. So we shouldn't only depend on NATO when it comes to EU defense. So that's why common security is important. And I think as we do need to prep up the arms industry, though I do not agree that it should be something that just we only put money into, but if we do that, it should be through nationalization, so it's not only up to firms that work for profit or foreign firms like from Israel, for example, that we depend on.
Thank you. Climate change is number one thing. My aim is to go to the ITER committee, which is actually the committee where you make decisions about energy and internal market. So I would actually focus on internal market for defense industry capabilities and also questions around data. I come from the tech industry and I know very well how harmful data can be in wrong hands. And I'm super worried that we are exporting data from the EU to China, which is authoritarian communist country. And where you cannot talk about human rights like we do here in the Western world, and at the same time we are exporting like a code, meaning data from the EU there freely. So that's something that I would like to change because the question was what I can do. So this would be something.
Thank you, and I think that you stole my comment about the defense commissar. Well, I think it's unfortunate how the discussion about the defense commissar has gone in Finland. A lot of this Valikoinen are asking if you want the defense commissar, but I don't think that the original idea that we would be building a common army in EU and this construct sort of organize that. No, but it could be about organizing rearmament in specific areas and looking to see that we get these industries within the EU which produce defense equipment to get the necessary investments they need. In Finland, we have a Navo who produces ammunition, and they will have the capability to expand their production, but they didn't get the necessary investments in time.
Thank you all. And now let's move on to the next theme of our panel, which is the climate and the environment. While the Union has made significant targets in climate measures, scientists insist that more action and increased funding are necessary to meet EU climate goals. Let's start off this theme with few yes and no questions. The first statement is, the Union must tighten its climate policies to ensure the viability of the planet for future generations.
Would anyone like to comment on the answer? Barbara, please.
Yes, I would absolutely love to say yes, but I'm realistic here. So I think the targets that we have set now, they are not okay, but it's something that we agree on. So I would like to keep those at least and implement all the regulations that we actually make this term. And let's see how it works. Yes, I would be very populistic saying here that we need to be more, we need to do more. We need to do more, definitely. But we need to keep everyone in this game, otherwise we will lose it. So that's why I'm answering like this, but let's see the targets that we have right now.
Lauri, you answered no. Would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, but add on the previous comment that if we tighten those actions too much, and it starts to hurt the ordinary European citizen, that is going to alienate them more and have them, aside from like being critical towards the climate policies, to be openly against them. This is probably not what we want. We want at least reach 2050 goal. So we can implement those climate actions that are not that detrimental to the ordinary citizen, or at least we have to have some method of compensating that. So when we had this nature restoration law in the European Union, there was no like concrete compensation for member states like Finland, for example, who take one of the biggest tools in the union. So it needs to be more fair for everyone to get them or keep them in the game.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I answered yes, but then I was a bit hesitant. But I think we should be more ambitious with our goals, and that's fine. But even these 2050 goals we have all agreed on, they're impossible for us to implement with the techniques we actually have right now in our review. Well, in our tools. Because the minerals and technology isn't yet sufficient enough in order to make this whole green transition possible. And this is something we really need to think about. We need to make the necessary investments in new technology and research. And that's really the only way we can reach these goals. I see a lot of frustration in especially young people, but everyone about how difficult this whole process is. And I think part of that is because we lack the tools and the equipment we need.
Thank you, Dan. Before we move forward to Ina and eventually Julia, I'd like to ask from our audience, Levi, what is your favorite season now that we are talking about climate?
Well, it's pretty surprising.
Once enough.
I think I'm not sure.
Maybe summer.
Yeah.
I'd go with that. Yeah. Okay. How about you guys? Summer? Yes, summer.
Yeah, probably summer.
I like autumn. Oh, I totally understand that as well. Yeah,
We also post grant for like election season.
that's a good one. Line. Perfect. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Summer.
Great, one for the team. Tina, now with the statement and your answer, if you need a reminder, I can go forward with it first.
Well, I'm happy to kind of answer also the answers we've already heard. I think when we talk about realism, and I do understand where the worries come from, but at the same time, the reality is that, for example, last April was the hottest April on record, and that was the 11th month in a row. That was the hottest in recorded history. So we are really living already through these historical times. We're already seeing how in a 12-month period, the 1.5 degree heating since pre-industrial times have been reached. So already there is like not going to be a normal that we are gonna like, oh, people are not gonna accept this, like things are going to change no matter what. And I think really we actually face the crisis we are living in and start to think about not only kind of like how to answer it a few years later, but also how we mitigate it right now, and that also needs facing this kind of thing. And it also will probably mean, it is a genuine question for democracy, how do we get acceptance for these things, but I think the crisis does mean that we are going to live differently as well. But I would also like to say that we don't only need to talk about how it's going to be so expensive to answer the crisis or mitigate it, because it's going to be so much more expensive if we do nothing.
I think we should discuss much more that what's realism for the planet. And the way we're heading towards right now, it's not possible. We can't continue living like this. There is not an alternative where we can keep on overconsumpting, making more and more emissions, not doing anything. There is not this option. And it was actually just calculated that climate action will become 6 times more cheaper than not doing anything. Because that is how much climate destruction will cost us. And I think we should discuss much more about overconsumption and lessening our consumption, because technology is not the only way forward. We have big issues with our whole system, and we need a big systemic change where we have to start thinking about how we're living, what's a more sustainable way of living, what's a way of living in the capacity of both us, our well-being, and the planet's well-being.
Thank you. The next statement, so you may prepare your voting papers for that one. The next statement regards the EU's nature restoration law, which was already brought up. The statement is, it was right for the Finnish government to oppose the nature restoration laws in March.
Any quick comments?
Yes.
Go ahead.
No one was against the proposal itself, but I was hidden against the process how it went. As someone who knows the EU law very well and how these things have been made, Spain was really like doing it, how do I even say, it was completely wrong that they went over their mandate. Because when the member states get the mandate from all other 26 countries, you cannot negotiate something else. And that was the problem for the government, not the proposal itself. So, and we got an agreement, and everything is fine now, but this was something that media missed completely. And it's outrageous how media is actually like what kind of news they are getting from the EU, because this is all about the process of the brand.
Ian, would you like to elaborate on this issue of that?
Well, I think, of course, it's actually true that the media doesn't talk about the EU, and we only really get into these questions when it's like on the finishing line, but I still think it's quite shameful also how Finland asks, even if we criticize the process, because still we are talking about, again, the future of our planet and our nature, and I think a lot we hear is,
right?
Yes, So what we hear, for example, I was actually like last week in the same space in a panel, and there was a person from the center party. Unfortunately, there is not one right now who was discussing like, oh, we would oppose this because we need to uphold the center party's like most important thing to uphold here is the right to like private property in this sense. But I really think it's also in this sense a generational question where we kind of get like, they have the right to their private property and EU has not right to touch it. But if we're thinking about this is still a global issue, and if we kind of put the private property there first and not the global issue that's gonna face the future generations as well, it's kind of like, well, whose property and whose right to live you are talking about here? Only the people who live now or also the future generations.
Any more comments?
Yes, please. I think we are not talking about enough about biodiversity loss and the sixth mass extinction event we are currently going through on planet. It is one of the biggest threats of our time, and the nature restoration law is crucial for halting it. The Finnish National Panel has actually calculated that we have the ability to stop the biodiversity loss, but we cannot do it without this law. And I think it's very sad and it's very anti-science to be against this law. It is extremely important and has clear scientific support. It has clear public support. It was actually just pointed out that 75% of the Finnish people also support this. And I think it's extremely important. And I really hope that the Finnish government also takes this into consideration and starts working towards finishing getting this law through in the EU. This is so important.
Okay, thank you all. Let's move on to the next theme of the day, which is democracy. In a healthy and thriving democracy, people can speak freely about what their opinions are, elect their leaders, and shape their future. However, democracy should never be taken for granted. In the European Union, democracy faces challenges from, for instance, foreign interference, right-wing extremism, and democratic backsliding. In recent years, particular concern has been raised about the developments in Hungary, where the government has consolidated its power by suppressing democratic freedoms.
Dear panelists, the question is, how do you perceive the threats of democratic backsliding in the Union, and what specific actions do you believe the Union could take to safeguard democracy across the member states? Lauren, would you like to begin?
Yeah, I'd say the core issue is with it seems some sort of way part of the like new rise of new in a sort of way populist movements, and the core issue with these parties that have backslided, and to my knowledge, everything has to do with corruption in these countries. So Hungary, for example, most of the power is being concentrated through Orban and his cronies essentially, and we actually saw the same thing happen in Slovakia when people got back into power. So it has more to do with this, and in the European Union, we already have those mechanisms to sanction those governments that are backsliding toward the more corrupt and less democratic system.
Julia, go ahead. Well, I think we have a really big issue in Europe with far right rising, and this is a real issue that we should all be addressing and all be working together to stop this movement, because it's very dangerous for all of our future. And I think that democracy and human rights are the core values of the European Union. And these are the values that we must hold on to in all circumstances. I think values are actions, and we should choose to act towards them. And I think the EU should have more clear consequences and sanctions towards parties that are breaking our values. We should be ready to act, and so far there has been discussion of, like, for example, raising funds, but I also think we should taking out a possible suspension of voting rights in the council. Thank you. Done. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I believe that when you have a working democratic system, then you will see things working. And if we speak about how to get that to work, then it's anti-corruption work, which we brought up here earlier. It's very important, and to that, I also think broadening the knowledge of the people and the experiences of the people who live in the EU, you need to see what kind of life people are living elsewhere, where things are all right, comparatively. And this could be, among other things, exchange programs and encouragement of to utilize the free movements, the right to free movement within the EU.
At the national level, it's about education, it's about media and digital literacy, and it's about quality journalism. At the EU level, I agree with you. I think it's sanctions against these member states that are working against our common values, and it's also today their voting rights. Those are extreme actions, but I think we should see those much more because it's like training a dog. You don't ever do that, they will never learn. So that's something I would use at the EU level.
Yeah, democratic backsliding certainly is an issue, and as mentioned before, sanctions and withholding voting rights are important ways to fight against that, but also, as discussed before, it does at the moment leave us in a bit of a trouble with states like Hungary that in important questions can use this also to kind of work against it. Nevertheless, I would also like to bring up, it is a question of the society as a whole. So in order for us to participate in democracy, we need to be able to feel like we're part of the society. So I think work towards everyone being able to get an education, able to feel part of the society, whether it be to work or other kind of being social support is very important. I think everything that happens with whether it be civil organizations in the countries, but also I would like to say trade unions as well. I think right to strike, for example, is an important part of democracy, and I think we need to also view all of these as parts of it and also see that as a measure of democracy.
Thank you all. Any more comments on the issue? I guess not. So then we can move on to the next question. Around Europe, we have countries such as Ukraine, Moldova, and the countries in the Western Balkans which have clearly stated membership in the European Union to be their top foreign policy priority. Please prepare your voting papers as the question following the section goes as follows. Is the enlargement of the European Union inevitable? Any comments? Yeah, Lauri.
Well, I think my part is one of the examples of the more, I guess, critical views of EU expansion, but I do agree it's inevitable with the foreign policy that countries that are bordering Russia, for example, are trying to get closer to the European Union, NATO as well, to get away from Russian influence. We see that affects in Ukraine, Turkey, but I guess the main issue at hand is more so that how do we help these countries to admit themselves in the European Union? There have been some talks about if we should be more lenient on countries like Ukraine, can we accept the country at war? I don't think so. But in other ways, we will support them to reach those set goals so that when the EU inevitably expands, these countries do fulfill the requirements of the Copenhagen criteria.
Yeah. Yeah.
I actually agree with Lauri, and I think, generally I think it's a positive that development, again, the larger EU, that's maybe something totally good, but I think that we should focus on helping these countries fill the criteria for their EU membership. Like, for example, Ukraine, I don't think it's internationally realistic for Ukraine to join the EU right now, but we should support Ukraine both in the war, but also in becoming an EU membership. I think it's very important that we don't back down from our values, on our principles, like for example, regarding corruption, for example, regarding democracy, we have to stand up for our rights and help these countries to become able to feel the project.
Thank you. Ina?
Well, I answered no because I don't think it's inevitable. I mean, we could also be a disintegration of the EU as well in the future. Like, you cannot really know, and we are living in a very turbulent times right now. But I do think it's desirable, but also agreeing that we shouldn't just not get the states in as soon as possible. I think it's important in this kind of geopolitical situation we're living in that we have cooperation within democratic states and those that respect the human rights and the rule of law. So that also means that they have to fill the criteria of these things. And as mentioned before, we have to help them in the way to that.
Any comments, Aura and Dan? Okay, let's move forward. Next question is, if and when the enlargement process moves forward for the countries in question, should Finland take a bigger role in the enlargement policies and or support the countries bilaterally in the process? Any comments?
Well, actually, we are already doing that. Our civil servants from our foreign ministry are already in Ukraine supporting them because we see this as part of this important process, helping them become a member one day. I agree with you, all of you, indeed, they fill the criteria fully before becoming members.
Yeah, well, okay, I just have to say I agree with basically everything everyone there said, and it's nice to see that we can sort of agree on this thing. I think that shows also a lot about the future we can expect from the EU if we can agree on what is necessary for the EU if it needs to expand.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to the bilateral help that's not only in Ukraine we have members from single member states helping them, but we also see in Turkey right now that the supposedly pro-European government is trying to push a law that is actually pushing them away from the European Union and towards Russia. And we actually had a delegation from EU member states visit Georgia, and they had a clear message for the Georgian government that if they pass this law, then Georgia will be driven away from the European course. And that requires more like active involvement. That it's not only just that we support these countries, but also if they backslide in the actual accession process as well, then we need to actively like interfere in it and tell them that this is not okay and this is what we need to do to get you on the right track.
Thank you all. The next question regarding the enlargement policy is, how should the European Union be developed further when taking enlargement into consideration? Ina, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. Well, I think there are, of course, multiple pathways to this and multiple focuses, but all in all, I would actually like to see a more social Europe. Right now, we focus a lot on defense and economics. I do think those are important parts if we want to talk about peace project, if we want to talk about an economic project, but the social side of Europe has always kind of been there, but not really being actively enhanced. And I think for all of these important values, to actually have support in the member countries, for example, there needs to be a more social side, so supporting the citizens also with different programs. I think this is how we also get more support for democracy, for EU, for the climate policy. So that's one way I would put Europe forward.
Yeah, I disagree with this because it's in the competence of member states, and that's how it should stay. But what I would do is that I would actually do some change our budget. Basically, the EU budget is now heavily focused on agriculture, right? and this is not the way forward. I would actually nationalize that, and I would focus at the EU level more on climate change and digital transformation, because those are the things that are actually changing the world right now. So that's the big thing, and then adding some qualified maturity voting when it comes to foreign policy, as I said, human rights and sanctions and
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to add on the previous comment because the redistribution of the EU budget, we often need to rethink the way that our current cohesion policy works, because if we are going to admit new member states to the EU, we cannot have more member states that get more money from a ever smaller group. So we need to rethink the way that EU subsidies in agriculture or in general are being redistributed. And I hope that in the coming budget framework that the cohesion funds will be finally diverted towards Finland and the eastern border regions, because we see that the security policy and border regions are becoming more relevant in this coming time, and I hope that Finland will benefit from this.
Well, actually, I think of this, this moment, but I would like to also think of a step further when speaking about net contributors and when we take on new countries within the to the union. We would like to see those countries as well flourish and contribute more to the union in the long run. If we would take a poorer country to the union, that's the long-term goal, of course, for all of the EU countries to flourish and basically not there being some countries who take money from the union, but basically everyone contributes.
Julia, go ahead for 10 minutes.
Yes, I was just about to say that it's important to note that enlargement always has implications for EU decision-making processes, as we discussed earlier, and this is something we should note when considering getting new members in the EU. But overall, I think it's a big issue that the European Union seems a bit distant for its people, for us. And for example, when I have been talking to people about these elections, I have often noted that people don't really understand the European Union, they don't understand what's happening there, they don't understand how they're part of it. So I think it should be really important that we would get for example, more initiatives like the Forum of the Future of EU, that gives people a chance to, for young people, a chance to discuss what the decisions are, have their voice heard, to get overall more democratic view.
Thank you, everyone. Then let us transition to discussing economic policy. I know, a bit heavy stuff, but we are moving towards the end. So, recent economic data show quite disappointing numbers on the EU's economic growth. Despite years of efforts and recovery from the Eurozone crisis and a unified response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the European Union still lags in GDP growth and employment numbers behind the United States. The Finnish Ministry for Finance has also released a report that Finland will not see any GDP growth for 2024. And news has shown as well that several European countries are also seeing the same economic trends. The question goes, and we can begin with, which one is next up? Is it you? Okay, we'll begin with you. The question goes, is it still possible for the EU to be a significant economic superpower given these reports? How can the EU improve its overall economic activity and increase productivity among Europeans?
Well, I think it's extremely important that we invest in the green transition.
invest in combating climate change, but I also want to point out as a psychologist that we have a real issue with people's well-being and mental health. We see in Finland, globally and in the European Union, that people are getting more and more burned out. They have more and more mental health symptoms, which makes it happen that they are not able to work anymore. They get out of work, of studies, they're not able to contribute to the society, which also really harms our economy. Now, this is an issue I'm very worried about, that I don't think most economists actually understand, like, what are the financial outcomes. And I think if we actually want a better future for the European Union, for all of us, we have to start to discuss on how we should take our way of living to be more sustainable, both for the climate, but also ourselves, that our economic system also needs some changing. We can take a, sorry, Laura. We can take a comment from everyone, so let's just move from Laura to Alette.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue with the GDP or the lack of GDP growth is the fact that after COVID-19, most of the member states have been pumping ridiculous amounts of company subsidies, which basically makes smaller countries like Finland unable to play on an unequal playing field. And for this, or the main way to fix it would be a return to the old EU rules regarding competition, so that there would be no subsidy competition. Instead, the money would be more focused on innovation, obviously in regards to the green technologies and such. And I focus more on that, and also focus on cooperation between like third world countries, global south, and African countries, so that we can also further our own like economic growth, but also divert them away from countries like Latin.
Before we move forward to Pinja, would you, Lauri, care to elaborate how would that cooperation with Africa and African nations look like?
Well, in practice, of course, like trade policy is one factor, and development aid policy is the second factor. But we should be striving more or strive for more equal trade relationships, because as I've heard from different panels in the past, it's been many people point out that European countries are or companies are basically utilizing the locals like Africa, for example, exploiting their resources and labor, which fuels the issues in those countries for the benefit of the people. And that's also in regard to foreign policy, pushes them away towards countries like Russia and China. But if we try for more equal partnerships in the third world, for example, that would benefit us to get away from China and Russia, and also benefit them from getting away from there.
Does anyone have a comment on Lauri's comments? Okay, let's move on.
Well, if asking kind of if EU is able to be an economic superpower, I think still as one of the largest economic zones with the second strongest reserve currency of the world, I don't really see there is like a strong backslide to the EU not being economically relevant. Clearly, we are seeing this. I think as we see China and the United States move towards a more protectionist type of economic policies, I think the EU also can do that. We should invest in our own industry, especially into the green transition. I think that can also create a lot of new jobs, for example, and create welfare for whole of the continent. I do think there is an issue where our monetary policy and financial policies are essentially separate, where the Eurozone does have a common currency, yet no, the countries don't have monetary sovereignty over themselves. If the financial policies are, we do have some of the Maastricht rules that are also constantly broken by the member states. So I really think we should rethink how the financial rules work all together, because right now the austerity isn't working for the EU.
So there are three things. We are all regulating this market right now at the EU level. Second thing, we don't have a real capital market theory. So basically, we don't have risk financing like we have, like we see in the United States, for example. I'm speaking about the risk financing for 10, 15 years for investors. And then the third thing is that we don't attract talent. So those three things are the main issues for our lack of economic growth.
Thank you. In the long term, I think we can't really directly compete with the United States. So I would like to leave that comparison sort of outside the picture. But the main problem I see is the demographic transition. At this moment, the situation isn't the worst that it could be. But 50 years in the future, there will be far less people that are capable of working age, and this will significantly inhibit our economic growth. In Finland, for example, the effect of the aging population on our GDP growth is, I think it's 0.4 or 0.5%, and that's a huge number. If you think that Finland has had a GDP growth of, well, basically nothing but 1% a year, 1.5% a year the last 10 to 15 years, and that's a big problem. There aren't any economic models in history that could help us survive this, so we have to develop it here.
Thank you, Dan. Julia, you have a comment.
I just wanted to say I agree that it's a real issue that we're losing our workforce and our population is getting more older and retiring. And I just want to emphasize that this is the reason that we really have to take care of the young people we have. We have to make sure that people are able to keep working, keep finding their path in life and in society, and we don't have these issues that the small percentage of young people we have are not able to work. Because this is, I think, one of the biggest economic issues of our time.
Okay, Peter, sure.
Yes, something I also wanted to add in my answer. I do think we need to put energy into the economy. I also think it's an issue if we only look at the GDP growth, because so far we have seen that this type of economic growth cannot be decoupled from the use of fossil fuels. So as long as we also want ambitious climate policies, we really also need to find new models to see what we value altogether and not just GDP growth.
Thank you all. Now it's time for a statement. So if you are all for this out, and the statement goes as follows: the EU must have the ability to raise its own funds, for example, by taxation. Don, you answered no. Would you like to elaborate?
I answered no because of taxation. I think the EU can find creative new ways of getting its own funds, but not through direct taxation of the European Federation.
Could you name one for us?
For example, different flows from for example, from China, which are already in negotiations over the proposal or tariffs, I guess, are as big as US is process from China, which we could consider.
Thank you. And Aura, if you have a comment, you can move forward.
Yeah, I would like to increase own sources for the EU budget definitely. So digital taxation is something, pollution is something, pollution taxation we have already in place for plastics, for example. So there are different options for taxation that how we could increase the resources of the EU.
Yeah, I mean, as we are seeing this massive crisis that we are facing, again, answering the climate crisis and doing the green transition, but also as well continuing to support Ukraine and supporting our own defense, it is clear that the EU does need funds, and I think we have to have all options on the table. I think it's notable that taxation is not just about like income taxation. It's not like we are going to pay from our income to the EU, but there are a lot of taxes that can go across border. As mentioned, pollution is one. I think also a tax in terms of monetary transactions makes sense. Because this is not something that makes sense to do nationally when we are talking about international funds, for example.
Yeah, well, the tariffs are obviously fine, especially for polluting countries like China, but when we come to the question that should the EU have its own taxes, essentially it already gets its money from the member states. And even if we tax the citizens, we're still taxing the citizens of the member states. So it's, the core issue is more about how we think about using the budget. Do we have to increase it or decrease it? But as we saw with the Italy package with Ukraine, the money was basically taken from inside the current budget. There was no additional funding at the pro-Russian media states. So there's obviously better to do with even the current budget framework.
I think it's essential that the EU can collect its own fund. We need this to provide the EU budget with more flexibility and also the ability to invest in combating climate change and biodiversity loss. I think it's very important, and I'm in favor of exploring opportunities like, for example, an environmental tax. And also, I think we should overall look in our subsidies and eliminate all environmentally harmful and inadequate subsidies. Like, for example, right now we're currently basically giving out taxpayer money to the aviation industry, which is very harmful for the planet.
Thank you. Paula, before we move to the end of this panel with our last question, I would like to ask you to elaborate more on the taxation. You answered yes with your green, and you mentioned that EU should be able to collect taxes. So how would that look like, for example, a Finnish person in, what's the opposite of fury, in everyday life, for example?
Nothing much, I think. So we are already paying taxes for the EU from sugar, for example, and I don't think that anyone realizes that. So I don't think that a common user of sugar or plastics will actually see that. But how we will see that is that it will increase humanity in the EU, because now we have this constant fight between net payers and receivers, right? It's super harmful for us. So that's why of the EU budget, rather than having these envelopes sent by the national states.
Thank you. So we are moving towards the end of this panel. Before we go to our last question, or actually let's go to the last question. We'd like to have you summarize to us why this year's European Parliament election, 2024, matters. Can we start with Dan?
Thank you. It was short. It's because we've never seen a world in a shape that is right now, and a lot of things are happening right now. And I think this is probably the most exciting time to be alive, as it is the most scary probably time for us to ever be alive.
I'd like to say that all elections matter, always. So you always vote no matter what. At the EU level, it really matters that we will have people there who actually know how the institutions work, how politics work, so that we can do something real for climate change and economy, so that the EU will not be so behind the United States and China. So use your voting rights, no matter what election there is coming up. However, this is super, super important, and I want you go to vote.
Well, we already heard about the numbers of the climate crisis today, and this kind of crisis that go across borders can only be answered together as well. We don't have a day to lose, we are already too late, and altogether we especially do not have 5 years to lose. So for multiple reasons, but especially for the ability to live on this planet in the future, I think these elections are important.
Well, I agree with the previous point that all elections are important, but this one in particular is important for the fact that we've seen a lot of change in Europe. We have a war, and we just came from or sort of came by from a pandemic, and we need a new direction for Europe in a sense. Yeah.
I think we're at a crossroads in Europe on choosing on do we want to advance a sustainable future for us all, for the benefit of us all, or do we want to go back and stay back? Like we discussed earlier in this panel, these changes are happening, it's inevitable, but the question is, what are we going to do and when are we going to start doing it? And now is the time to act. And you can act by voting, and I really hope that everyone remembers to vote, because these are elections that are historically important. Because now we can choose to make a difference. Thank you. And now we would like to give the audience the opportunity to ask questions from either every one of the panelists or a single one, however you choose. But the floor is yours. Jonathan will bring a mic to you from here, and if you would kindly state your name and your question. The question can be either in Finnish, English, Swedish, however you prefer. The first one is there. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Uwe, and my question is about the European Union's Agency for Fundamental Rights. A couple of days ago, published their LGBTQIA survey, which was done now again after 5 years. So, yeah, 5 years. So the last one, I think, 2019, and it surveyed 100,000 people, and the cliff notes is that more people are open about their LGBTQIA status, but also that 1 in 3 are facing discrimination, and over 50% have been affected by hate-based harassments. And as a member of the European Parliament, how would you support the LGBTQIA people in Europe, and especially youth?
Done. You can take it.
Thank you. I'm going to have to go after this answer, but it's an important thing, and I think this goes with the democratic process that we have. Nobody should ever be harassed in a democratic country, or any country for that matter, but especially a democratic country. Not okay. And here I think the same work that we do with keeping our countries democratic will also contribute in helping this thing. But I have to leave now. Thank you very much.
Couldn't agree with you more. However, in ITRE committee, it was not really in the competence of the committee that I'm aiming for, so it's not really the center of the work in the parliament. However, very important.
Yes, of course. Something I would agree with the previous speaker. Something I would like to bring up is the quite worrisome trend of this anti-gender movement that we are seeing in Europe, and that has a lot of funding, for example, from extremist groups from the United States. And I think something kind of seeing how these funds are flowing and thinking, for example, if we can restrict those somehow would be important, because it is really a problem with human rights in Europe if we are getting outside forces. Of course, we have problematic forces of our own as well, but especially with these big funders that come from abroad and help strengthen this kind of hate speech, for example.
Yeah, I agree with the fact that the issue itself, and also the fact that it's more so of a national competence issue. We do have some regulation at the EU level on how we should regulate hate speech, and that's like one way to address the issue is that we already have some like laws in place in regard to harassment, and we could enforce more so as a toughening of the punishment with the hate crimes.
I think this is a very important human rights issue and at the very core of the European Union. I think we have to make sure that everyone in the European Union is able to live freely as they are and be accepted as they are. And this is actually also a very important mental health and well-being issue. And I think the European Union could do a lot more regarding it. And I think, for example, a big issue is a big thing we should promote more is, for example, everyone's ability to get married, for example, adoption rights, for example, recognizing different family structures in all different European countries.
Then next up, there.
Hello, I'm Natalie. I'm here with Latvia's Social Scientists Society. You mentioned on multiple of the topics about strengthening the EU for itself, as well as supporting and working with African countries. How would you strengthen the EU's industries simultaneously as cooperating with outside countries?
So I'm guessing it's directed towards me. Yeah. Yeah, well, it's a matter.
Well, the question was for the whole panel.
Yeah. Well, I can start because I'll talk more about it. It's a matter of mutual cooperation because Finland and Europe, Finland, for example, we cannot be entirely self-sufficient, even though that should be a goal, because we don't simply have all the materials. Same applies to any other European country and on some aspects, maybe the EU in general, and that's why we need to find the partners in Africa, for example, that we can give them resources and materials that they don't have, and they can give something back to us in return, and sort of have a mutual cooperation relationship. Instead of trying something similar with Russia and China, it's an example that we had this attempt of mutual dependency that failed because we thought that it would be bilateral, but actually it was unilateral, and actually they could use it to oppress us in practice.
Well, I would say that these are not in opposition to each other. We can still strengthen our own industry while finding these mutual partnerships. But actually, I would like to bring up something that Europe could work on that doesn't even necessarily mean direct investment. I think the debt burden on the global south, including Africa, is very high. And of course, this is a lot due to the history of colonialism, which Europe was very present for. So I think Europe should actually work towards forgiving the debts of the global south. So this would already, so we don't only have to like put money into it and be kind of thinking about it this way, but we can also help for them to grow economically in this kind of way when they are no longer burdened in that kind of historical way.
One concrete thing I would do is that I would open the agricultural market of the EU for African countries, because I think this is something concrete absolutely right now. I also don't feel like these are opposites, but rather things you can do both together. And I think the European Union should do more globally and have more strong global cooperation with different countries. And regarding Africa, I think Pia pointed out a very important point about European colonialism and our history with it, which still can be seen today. And it's a very big issue we have to address. And I also feel that we really have to bear our responsibility regarding climate change and regarding global south, as if they are the biggest risks of climate change, and at the same time they have produced a lead amount of emissions. It is extremely unjust and unfair, and I think we have our global responsibility to help.
First of all, thank you to the panelists and to the host who've been a great one so far. My name is Stella, and my question has to do with European Union's dependence. So throughout this panel and throughout election talks, we've heard a lot about China and the questions of dependency and security have been very Eastern oriented. But for this question, I'd like to divert our eyes a bit more to the West. So, as we all know, the United States of America is an economic behemoth. They have a lot of influence over the European Union when it comes to security and when it comes to all political matters. I mean, these social media companies such as Meta are all US owned and they have a lot of influence, especially of the EU. I would like to ask you whether the European Union could strive to be more dependent from the United States of America as well. And if so, how would you do that?
Yeah, I can go first. Well, first we have to recognize at the moment the US is essentially the largest strategic partner with the European Union and the European countries. I don't think we could at least now diverge from it, but I do agree with the fact that we still need to have a plan B for the situation that the US suddenly would abandon Europe. And that means that even in the NATO framework, we have a lot of European countries. It's not just the USA. We have Poland, the UK, and larger countries like that, for example. And we need to work on strengthening the European side of the NATO, and also in regards to regulating the social media. Yeah, I've noticed the same that in these elections, it's very TikTok oriented, but actually the Western all the media like Meta, for example, they're actually copying the same methods that TikTok use, but the data is just flowing toward the US instead of China, and that is why we should actually regulate all of social media regardless of where it comes from.
Oh, yes, but the point is that we already did. The DSA is in place, and Meta and Google are applying for that. TikTok is not. So that's why we don't talk about the USA anymore. We have the privacy seal for data transfers. We have the ombudsman in Washington for the US companies and data going there. We don't have that with China. So you should actually know the laws that are implemented in the EU before you propose something new. And that's the problem with this EU discussion, that people don't know what we have already done and implemented and what kind of agreement we have for data, for example, between the States and the EU. We don't have that in place with China, and that's the whole point. And also, China is the communist authoritarian country, where it's a communist leadership. So it's a completely different game than the Western country. We are begging to send weapons to Ukraine right now. So that's why it's a different thing. But you should know the laws that are implemented right now before we talk about the new laws.
Julia, next up, and thank you.
Well, I honestly don't think we should be naive regarding the United States. It is true that China has more issues, but if we're looking at the development the United States is going right now, I don't think it's healthy or democratic at all. And regarding data, it's true that the EU has made legislation about this issue regarding social media, but at the same time, Meta just month before the European elections put up this new ban of political content on Instagram, for example, that is automatically on this filter that removes this political content people see. And I think it's a very big issue that I really would like European
It was asked by the EU, come on. It was asked by the EU. Come on, that's the whole point. So isn't that the thing that we should be talking about then? It comes from the EU regulation.
No, I don't think if they are
Well, I can explain to you in details if you wish.
Yes, I really hope, because at the same time they released this new filter about not sure how to say it in English, but like disturbing content. That is also a filter, but that's not on automatically, but the political filter is.
I think the discussion regarding the platform, for example, shows the issues of this monopolization of our social media consumption, of our media consumption, and I think there comes a larger issue when we have these strong hegemonic states. So yes, I actually agree that altogether we shouldn't be dependent, whether it be this kind of economically, defensively, or culturally on these kind of hegemonic states. I would actually like to see a much more multipolar world in that sense too. Of course, we do see the authoritarian states is rising there as well. But as I brought up previously when it came to questions of defense, I do agree with the point that we actually have to strengthen the competence of European states, work together also on matters on defense and not just rely on the United States, for example.
Any other replies to this? No? Next question?
Hello, my name is Jadwin Milian.
No, sorry. Okay.
Hello.
This one will be the last question for the night, so.
Hello, my name is Jadwin Milian. I am from PIP Oslo. I would like, you guys mentioned that some of non-EU countries have some problems such as corruption. I would like to ask you, how would EU help them to reduce the corruption of their countries and join the EU? Thank you.
Well, I think, probably a lot of ways, but one thing is when we have countries where there is more transparency already, where we have the practices of governance, so these people who have worked in government be present there, follow what's going on, and also bring these ways that have worked with governance into practice in those places. I think just like it's also important just to be on the ground and help this kind of fledgling democracies. Again, I think it's at the same time important to recognize that our democracies are not perfect, but with countries that have already dealt with these kind of issues or have put on governance that works, we should also be present there and actually give that practice. Because from what I've heard, oftentimes the education, for example, is not on the level that the people would be capable of that in the sense, because if you already grow up in a corrupted system, you don't really know that well. What else can you do with it? So education, I think it's important.
Yeah, well, I agree with you, and actually I don't have anything more to add. Is that not a comprehensive answer that we need to have more like boots on the ground help with the inside the countries. We can't just dictate from dictate from above and say, oh, you have corruption, we can't come to the European Union. We need people to be concretely in the field and help them to solve these issues, either through legislation and also like common practice in the bureaucracy or industries.
Thank you. I have nothing to add. Very good points. Thank you.
At this point, I would like to thank our panelists and our audience here in Neuro, and at home for attending this panel today. A joint message by all of our organizations is that remember to vote. On June 9th is the main voting day for this year's EU elections. And thank you all for joining us today.
Yes.